In the summer of 1961, in a basement laboratory at Yale University, an ordinary man sat in front of a machine with 30 switches. Each switch sent a stronger electric shock to a stranger in the next room. The stranger grunted, then shouted, then screamed, then went silent. And the ordinary man, a school teacher, an engineer, a salesman, kept flipping switches, all the way to the end. He was not a monster. He was you. This is the Milgram obedience experiment. The most disturbing study psychology has ever produced, yes, and the most misunderstood. Almost everything you think it proved is wrong. The real finding is darker and far more specific than the idea that people blindly obey. And once you understand what actually happened in that room, you'll start seeing it everywhere. In your office, in your inbox, in your own hands, including in the mirror. In 1961, a 27-year-old psychologist named Stanley Milgram was watching the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of the Holocaust, broadcast from a glass booth in Jerusalem. Eichmann did not look like a monster. He looked like a clerk. His defense was simple. He was only following orders. Milgram, the son of Jewish immigrants raised in the Bronx, asked a question that haunted him. Could it happen here? Were the Germans somehow different? Or would ordinary Americans do exactly the same thing? So at Yale, he placed an advertisement in the New Haven newspaper. He offered $4.50 to any man willing to take part in a study of memory and learning. 40 men answered. Teachers, postal clerks, engineers, laborers. They believed they were helping science understand how punishment affects memory. They had no idea they were the experiment. And memory had nothing to do with it. Here's how it worked. 2 men arrived at the lab. One was a real volunteer. The other was an actor, a mild, pleasant accountant in his 50s named Mr. Wallace. They drew slips of paper to decide who would be the teacher and who would be the learner. The drawing was rigged. The real volunteer was always made the teacher. The learner was strapped into a chair in the next room, electrodes taped to his arms, and he mentioned, almost casually, that he had a heart condition. Then the teacher was seated in front of the machine. 30 switches, rising from 15 volts to 450. The labels climbed from slight shock to danger, severe shock. The final 2 switches carried no words at all, only 3 letters. X, X, X. The rules were simple. Every time the learner got a word pair wrong, the teacher delivered a shock and moved 1 switch higher. At 75 volts, the learner grunted. At 120, he shouted that the shocks were starting to hurt. At 150 volts, he demanded to be let out. He had a heart condition, remember. At 300 volts, he screamed and pounded on the wall. And then, somewhere past 330 volts, something worse happened. He went completely silent. No answer is a wrong answer, the experimenter said. Keep going. And when the teacher hesitated, when he turned around, pale, and asked whether he should stop, the man in the gray coat said only 4 things. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. That was it. No threat, no weapon, no punishment for refusing. The man in the coat had no real power over them at all, only a clipboard and a calm voice. Before he began, Milgram asked a panel of psychiatrists to predict the results. They were confident. They estimated that only about 1 in 1,000 people, the rare psychopaths, would go all the way to the end. They were wrong by more than 600 times. 65% of them, 26 out of 40 ordinary men, pushed the final switch, 450 volts, X, 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 into a silent man with a heart condition, and not a single one of the 40 stopped before reaching 300 volts. They did not do it coldly. Milgram watched them sweat through their shirts, tremble, dig their fingernails into their own flesh. One man broke into a strange, helpless, nervous laughter every time he heard a scream. They knew. They begged the experimenter to go and check on the learner, and then they obeyed anyway. Milgram could not believe it. So he ran the experiment again. And again, more than 20 variations, over 700 people in total. He moved the learner into the same room in plain sight. Obedience fell. He forced the teacher to physically press the learner's hand down onto a shock plate. Still, almost a third of them did it. He took himself out of the room and gave his orders by telephone. Obedience collapsed to barely 1 in 5. The closer the authority, the more they obeyed. The closer the victim, the less. Milgram gave the thing he was watching a name. He called it the agentic state, the moment a person stops seeing themselves as the author of their own actions and starts seeing themselves as an instrument, simply carrying out someone else's will. In the agentic state, you do not feel responsible. You feel like a tool, and tools do not have a conscience. Here is the part everyone gets wrong. For 60 years, the lesson has been humans blindly obey authority. Order people to do something terrible, and most of them will. But that is not what the data showed. In 2012, a psychologist named Gina Perry went into Milgram's own archives and found cracks. Many participants suspected the shocks were fake, and the experimenter often pushed far beyond his 4 scripted lines. And then came the deeper discovery. Years later, 2 researchers, Alexander Haslam and Stephen Riker, analyzed which of the 4 prods actually worked. The first 3, the ones that appealed to the experiment, to its importance, to science, kept people going. But the 4th prod, the only one that was a true command, you have no other choice, you must go on, failed every single time. Not once did a participant obey it. The moment they were simply ordered, they stopped. They did not go to the end because they were commanded to. They went because they were persuaded it mattered. They believed they were helping. So now look at yourself. You have done this, not with shocks, but you have done the quiet version. The email you sent because your manager said to, even though something in it felt wrong. The rule you enforced on someone because they were the rules. The line you would not cross until a person you respected told you it was fine. For the good of the team, the company, the mission. You weren't being cruel. You were being useful, diligent, loyal. That is the trap. The most dangerous people in Milgram's basement were not the cruel ones. They were the conscientious ones. The ones who wanted to do a good job and who cared what the man in the coat thought of them. Milgram wrote that the most fundamental lesson of his study was this: ordinary people, simply doing their jobs and without any particular hatred of their own, can become the agents of a terrible process. Not the monsters, the employees, the volunteers, the helpful ones. The man who pushed the final switch went home that night, kissed his family, and slept. He had only been doing what someone who seemed to know better had told him was important. The man in the gray coat had no gun, no badge, no power at all. He had a calm voice and a reason. That was always enough. It still is.